Top of the morning. Hello and welcome back to the Worcester Senior Center Stay Connected programming on Channel 192. My name is Suki Lapin and I am the program coordinator at the Worcester Senior Center. In honor of St. Patrick's Day, the Worcester Senior Center collaborates with Worcester poet Curtin and the Worcester County Poetry Association. Curtin and fellow poets and friends will read selections from Curt's newest collection, Kerry Dancers. You'll meet Da, Ma, Aunt Nora, and the rest of the family. Dance a reel in Boston's Hibernian Hall and shake the hand of the man who shook the hand of notorious Boston Mayor James Michael Curley, with live fiddler music by members of the New England Jazz Enrichment Foundation. You'll be dancing in your seat. I have the honor to introduce today Roger Martin, president of the Worcester County Poetry Association. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Worcester County Poetry Association. He has been a member since 1972. This is his third year as president of the association. He has been the managing editor of the Worcester Review for 27 years. Roger has published 5 books of poetry. His latest collection, coming out this year, is a collaboration with artist calligrapher Zi Quan of China with poems in English and Chinese. Please welcome Roger Martin.
Thank you, Suki. Thank you. As president of the Worcester County Poetry Association, let me also welcome you to St. Patrick's Day and to the 50th anniversary of our existence. For 50 years, along the spine of New England, the Worcester County Poetry Association has been a home to volunteers who believe in and nurture poetry in all its forms. For almost 50 years, it has sponsored publication of the Worcester Review, a nationally respected literary journal. Additionally, we welcome all volunteers who have their own loves or interest in poetry. So please feel free to seek us out on our website or at our monthly board meeting on the second Wednesday of each month, particularly if you have a school or community poetry concept that you would like to nurture. Please feel free to come and join us. And now let us turn to the feature of today's celebration, poet Curtin, whom I've had the privilege of knowing for decades. And I particularly loved one of his poems, Katie and the Poet, which we first published in the Worcester Review. Curt is a poet who believed in the song of his Irish poetic roots and committed himself to them. In 2010, his poetry was selected as the winner of the Frank O'Hara Prize. At age 90, he has just published Kerry Dancers, his second book of poetry, which follows For Art's Sake. He has 2 previous chapbooks, Embers Carried Across the River in a Gourd and Elusive Music. Because Curt is legally blind, in addition to himself, a number of his fellow poets will also read his work. These include, in order, Dee O'Connor, his wife, and as she says, the only one who is not a poet, Judith Ferrara, Paul Slozak, and Susan Roney O'Brien. I'd like to conclude with the final stanza of that poem, Katie and the Poet. You will hear the complete poem later in the broadcast, but it ends this way. Still, I wonder, does he talk like that all the time? It must be a fine headache for his wife to be always thinking, what does he mean? And does he expect an answer? And now, let us turn to poet Curtin.
So Just a few words about Irish immigrants. And that sounds rather strange because you might hear a great many Irish words about Irish immigrants at some of the clubs in Boston. Now, the Irish county clubs in Boston, and they're at Hibernian Hall in Roxbury. And my first really strong meeting, aside from meeting with my aunt and a couple of other good family members in Boston, as a child, was going to the Irish County Club meetings with my father and mother, where they talk for a while about Irish history and Irish problems in America or whatever they think is important. And then comes the dancing and the singing. And that's the wonderful time everybody waits for in Boston.
The County Kerry Men's and Women's Benevolent Association, Boston's old Hibernian Hall, was a many-chambered Irish hive, and the buzz inside the meeting rooms was lively talk of politics and memories and love of people one could trust. The door was shut, the gavel rapped, and matters grave as a family's name, or light as to who's to make the raisin cake and tea, were handled in a parliamentary vein. You had to be a member or a guest to get inside, for these were folk who knew of British betrayal. So the double doors with flatted eye and passwords to deny the prying Yankee, I suppose, who never seemed to try. The sergeant-at-arms was posted by the door, prepared to repel Boston Blue Nose, one might suppose, come to interrupt the dancing, banned in a land that claimed the name of freedom. When the business and argument was done, and women went in back to heat the tea, someone would ask Sister Donovan to sing. Then, in kindness and the loyalty, they also asked a song of Sister Flynn. A patched and ragged squeeze-box was brought out. Oh, the dancing that began would shake the hall as heavy men and women took to reeling round the floor. They did the rakes of mallow and filled the fluter's ball. Where's a toot of the flute and a twiddle of the fiddle? We're hopping in the middle like a heron on the griddle, and just up, down, dance around, all around the hall. On hadn't we the gaiety that filled the flute's ball? And even the sergeant-at-arms joined in. Indeed, when all the halls were at the dancing time, the music had to ring to Beacon Hill to make the sober Yankees sing.
The first poem I'm going to read is one of my favorites. It's the title poem from Curt's book, Kerry Dancers. And I especially like it because it seems that you can't even read it on the page without hearing the sounds and the lilt of Kerry in the sound of the words in the poem. And Curt and I had the chance about 2005 to go to County Kerry and to drive up the Dingle Peninsula and see some of the countryside and in the thatched roofs, and all of that is echoed in this poem. And he had the chance to read the poem while we were in Ireland, which was quite a nice experience. So, Kerry Dancers. I left the stories the old folks told in the memory bin where childhood and its toys are kept. Infant, boy, and man, I heard the lilt of Kerry in my Boston home. But my mind, you see, was all American. And yet at times, unexpected as a bit of marmalade in an omelette, and wouldn't that be a fine thing? I hear myself speaking in a tongue I knew before I owned a song of me own at all. That was ages ago, and haven't I worked and traveled and sung another cadence, an American song of my own since then? Still, I was surprised to hear the echo alive in me of voices from another country. all from a piece of rocky land stuck like a finger into the eye of the sea. The old ones' voices are in my ear, still tuned to a distant song where the Kerry dancers wheel to pipes and after speak of dying, as if the one were somehow spun out of the other. And after all, the wind that whispers in the thatch may be the tongue of an evil one. 'Tis true that roofs do whisper through the thatch, and the seas cry out in nights when tides break high on ragged rocks where fishermen have died. The Kerry dancers speak of these in a cadence light as a dingle mist, a way of singing in the speech where you'd like to dance the night away.
Oh, the days of the merry dances, oh, the ring of the piper's tune, oh, for one of those days of glory, gone alas, like youth too soon.
Ah well, as the piper says, I plays it as I hears it, and ye dances as ye likes. The next poem, it comes from some of Curt's memories of the early days. He was a child of the Depression, born 5 months after the stock market crash. And so in his youth, he and his mother used to do all kinds of things to try to make a penny here and there. And one of the things they used to do was to grow pansies and sell them on Memorial Day. And so the poem here talks about that, and you'll see some hints of the Irish-Italian relations as they echo in this one poem as well. It's called Memorial Day, Hope Cemetery. Just off the streetcars, in city heat, women bought pansies from my cart, then trudged uphill to decorate a grave. Many came from North End tenements where graves of famous Yankees stay, in padlocked iron shrines, streets where air is sweetened with tomato sauce and cannoli. Other women arrived from Southie, speaking English with a lilt lighter than air, in factories where they worked their days, holding tight far memories of green. You weren't here last year. No, ma'am. She walks around the cart as women do, buying greens for soup. She put 2 baskets in a canvas bag, counted out change, and walked away, heavy hips rocking above fat ankles over broad black shoes. Abandonari had a big stand up the street, pansies, other kinds he'd worked so hard to raise. Now, here's an Irish kid, me, with a crate on wheels selling cheap. He called the cops to shoo me off. One came and asked my name. Curtin. My mother and I raised these. Well, kid, I'm Sergeant Callahan. You can leave the cart right there. Call me if anyone disagrees. One for all and all for one, the day Lieutenant Pescatori was away. The women linger with me still, in wide hats and stolid looks, in the heat that rose from the tarred street, so sweat ran down their heavy legs. In a trick of memory, I see them stuck to the seats of the streetcar, strangers talking each to each of thoughts they knew would be received.
Just another comment on Italians, because there is a story or two in this about Italians, a good-natured story about Italians, and I just wanted to point out in advance to people who wonder about the connection between Irish and Italians. I grew up in a section of Boston where there were Italian families on either side of our house. And so we were regularly meeting with Italians, and they were wonderful people. And I can remember as a small child being out in the yard, and the woman next door looks over the fence and says, there you are. Would you like a little something to eat? And I went over to her, of course, and obviously she thought that I was in need of food. Well, I was just a little scrawny kid. That was the real thing. But I was treated by Italians in the best way possible through the rest of my life. And so that is part of our attitude about it, even as we tell a joke about a connection between Italians and Irish.
I have the the luck of the Italians to be able to read two magnificent Katie poems from Curt's Kerry Dancers. And to know that Katie is a composite. She is a fictional character that Curt put together from all the memories of his childhood. And I think we all have memories of those kind of strong individuals, either their relatives or friends in the neighborhood or in the family. And they're full of strong opinions and stories. And so this is Katie and the Italians. I've nothing against them, mind you, though it was grand when the neighborhood was only Irish, and you could tell who it was stealing towels off the line. Italians start moving in when they ran out of space in another place to put up shrines, cement to St. Anthony or Rocco. They've an awful passion for cement, using it for steps and porches and even seats. My John says if many more move in, all the houses will sink 10 feet with the weight. That's what happened in Venice, he said. And there's the smell of their cooking. Sure, it can't be right to be spoiling good food with garlic and basil. Myself, I use a spoon or two of salt, and there's only a nice bit of smell to boiled potatoes and butter, though it does get strong when I boil the beef with cabbage and turnips. At least, they've never complained. Though how would I know, with them talking in their way faster than I can say the rosary? My John says that they put olive oil on their tongues to make them go fast. I do say they're very generous people. The ones next door gave my John a whole gallon of homemade red wine. We're not sure what to do with it, but we thanked them anyway and gave them a mackerel John caught down at the docks. And any of you who out there who are poets know that sometimes people in the family or friends don't understand our writing poetry as a thing that we do and what poetry looks like. And it's all kind of different on the page. It isn't like prose at all. Of course it isn't. And so here's Katie back again. This is the poem to which Roger referred at the very beginning. Katie and the poet. Isn't he grand? The man has such a way with words, how they flow like God's own thoughts, from somewhere you wouldn't be likely to know. And he does it all with bits of talk scattered around like a broken mirror instead of a sentence you could read all at once. It's deep, he is, and learned in things you wouldn't understand any more than a goat in church. Ah, but wasn't that a grand poem he wrote, full of words that I haven't heard more than twice in my life? And he read it all with such wonderful feeling. You'd swear to God he was a priest. My John was making eyes all the time, all the while, but I can tell you I was deeply moved. The whole thing just flowed like water over a bog, a river of words and not one of them too plain. I wasn't at all that sure of his meaning, but I get the drift, as they say of fog in the morning. We shouldn't be too proud, you see, pretending to know all the deep things a man like that could say. Still, I wonder, does he talk that way all the time? It must be a fine headache for his wife to be always thinking, what does he mean? And does he expect an answer? Thank you. Thank you, Curt.
Yes, just a quick review of the Curtin clan. At home, of course, Da and Ma. And Da was a wonderful father, and you'll see in some of the poetry written about him. And he happened also to be a Boston policeman. And Ma was a wonderful cook and friend around the house in every way. And there were 7 children. Unfortunately, a couple of them died early on, as did happen to many of the young who came over from Ireland in the early days.
The lesson. When I was a boy of 7 or 9, my da taught the closing of doors. We stood by the kitchen door, he leaning low and near, his face become the room itself. He said, "You turn the knob like this." The rough map of his hand covered everything. The knob, the vast kitchen where our lessons met. Perhaps the universe where moments went to be turned and turned until they could be seen from anywhere. You don't need to slam.
One of the things I want to mention, and it follows nicely with Curt's poem, The Lesson, the idea that there are, I think, 41 poems in this book. 9 of them are about his father. So there's no doubt of the relationship he had between him, that was existing between him and his father, because he's got him in all sorts of wonderful ways. And it certainly is a pleasure to read his poems about that. The beatings. Parents are advised, and I agree, never to strike a child. So many ways to teach anything at all. Agreed? When I was small, my father used a strop, a great wide razor strop that hung in the kitchen, like the sword of Errol Flynn, who used it only on evil buccaneers. Though he tried, the strop never descended on me. On signal, I took off around the room in a radiating wail, my voice louder than the cries of the Valkyries, whoever they might be. My father, larger than Valhalla in the kitchen, followed, slowly slapped the strop and said that lies or something else would be the end of me. It may seem an evil thought, but some sense of humor that was always kind in him makes me think. I can almost remember that he smiled, and then we had dinner. The next poem is The Touch. Every day in the intimate orbit of kitchen, he shaved with a straight razor stropped on a wide strap, used at times for loud and harmless discipline, and soaped his beard with a hog's hair brush. Da was large, larger than the kitchen then. I stood beneath him, solemn below the brush he dipped in soap. Without a word, he leaned a little, lightly dabbed my nose, and, now that I recall, very nearly smiled. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to be reading 2 poems about Curt's family. The first, called Family. I know it's a cliche. Love, hate, a child's seesaw for autonomy. Decide, I say, get it straight. It's easy if I take my sister's part. Anger so great, alone and poor, she tore up her inheritance. Hatred hidden all those years, except I always knew, just not this paradoxical revenge. I knew a brother gone to Rome, gone without my knowing why or being told. Another brother told me at a funeral that when I left, he praised my courage, said of himself, I was a coward. Am I making a case? 7 children, one died early, all fed and clothed and good enough during the spare depression days. There's dedication for you, mothers, fathers, long sacrifice. Nothing to sneeze at, as they say, nor whimper over wrongs or crust of dried emotion. I suppose that's it, picking at scabs so the blood comes through, shared. And the next poem is called More About My Father. My father's humor tickles me more and more now that he's gone so many years. He never rehearsed. We wouldn't know when his muse was on until an observation turned his mind to mimicry. Grand or fancy airs would bring it on, a lifted chin, eyes rolling to the sky, a prancing strut that leveled pretension to foolery. For the TV shill who posed with cigarette in hand and flowers in her always golden hair to glamorize the smoke, he would, in parody of hand and mouth and eye, reduce the lure to hooey. Then with an impish glint, hinting fake delight, this big man who reprimands with nothing but a look and often spent his evening in the cellar, sauntered off to shovel coal, to rake the smirking cinders down. Closeted these many years, his light arrives like laughter, heard behind a heavy door. Thank you so much.
So, and there were aunts and uncles in number, one of whom was one of the aunts, very important to this particular story, Aunt Nora. And Nora was my father's sister in Ireland. And then when she came to the United States, she lived in South Boston. And so when my mother and father went back to visit in Ireland, they left me as a young child with Aunt Nora. She lived on West 7th Street in South Boston. And she was there during the time of the Irish parade, which I call it the Irish parade. So I really enjoyed staying with her. Nora was a wonderful friend and a good person, helped greatly with me and with the family. There's not much else I need to say about her except that everybody loved her and she was kind to almost everybody and could cook like a wonder. All right. And that's my Aunt Nora.
Everyone needs an Aunt Nora. I am incredibly envious of Curt having one growing up and being able to be comfortable and safe in her arms. The first poem I'm reading is called Aunt Nora McGonigal. She wore big bones in a way that made me want a hug. In memory, she is always in an apron, one with fullness to it, and the kind of faded print you can't remember. Her reddish gray hair was combed neatly into a lovely round bun. Her eyes wrinkled into kindness over good round cheeks in a good plain face I never had to guess about. Her voice was round and easy, and in her talk, she never lost the melody of Kerry. Being near her felt like wearing fleece, and the soul felt safe. The second poem is also about Nora. And I tried to put my hair into a bun like hers, but it isn't long enough anymore. So it's called Kindness. Wasn't she was all the best of the Irish and none of the worst? Nora knew herself, and the way you could tell it, she never acted a role when she smiled, whatever pleasure imagination brought at the way men acted large. She knew their lives asked a pint of ale to satisfy the sweat was lost, along with worry. She wore it the way she wore her hair tied back, the look of her in an apron. It wasn't she didn't value herself, or know she was valued by the loud, the vain, and the child. Independence was true to the bones, and she smiled so easily when it was right. As a child, I knew that I was safe, that others felt safe. That was at the bottom of it all. Thank you.
Yeah, as you may have noticed, there's a fair amount of time spent on Curt's Da. I actually counted, and about 25% of the poems in the book are about his Da. He was quite a gentle and joyful person, and so he appears in many places. And this is actually the final poem in the book, although it's not the final one we'll read. It's called Still Rearranging My Father. I am agreeably surprised when you arrive, as you would say, out of the blue. You stay a very little while, but each return, each bit of film projected on my mind revises you, and thus you edit me. I see you in Aunt Nora's home, pleased with the kind and smiling compliment of easy talk. That and a glass of Charlie's homemade ale. No one could be cross or intrude with a word of rebuke. I remember feeling happy for us there. Or you are nearly dressed for church and snatch whatever tie is first among the little stack that dangles on the mirror post. You thought it right to show respect, and that was what you meant by style. You're dancing alone in our little kitchen on St. Patrick's Day, graceful as a heavy man can be, one arm across your back in County Kerry style. I was there, but then I did not see the winning, youthful buoyancy. I see an older brother on your lap. You read to him a tale he understands. He understands this special kind of love that's his alone. And even now I cherish a little jealousy, happy for his gentle heart, and wish a little I were seen in simple need. All these arrive like time released to set your image right, reflects a light out of that little cellar space where night was easy. In the final poem here, we will feature Da again. This is the poem in honor of St. Patrick's Day. And you'll notice as you go through the poem, there are references in here to the notorious Mayor James Michael Curley, who was known to have spent a little time in jail while he was in office. Had several terms as mayor, was one term governor, and a little bit of time in Congress.
This next poem comes from a vivid memory. Nora McGonigal was my aunt, whose home in South Boston was our traditional St. Patrick's Day gathering place. The Purple Shamrock was the title of a book about James Michael Curley, then mayor of Boston, by Joseph Deneen, a reporter from the Boston Globe. St. Patrick's Day Parade, South Boston, 1946. Around the corner from Nora McGonigal's flat, where the British once fired on the heights, girls in green pranced in front of high school bands, and flags of red, white, blue, and green, white, gold were a sight to excite a boy and his Da. But to Da, who stood in the cold March air when the purple shamrock striding by, all smiles came, the moment Da had come for. Da began to shift his ample weight. Then, just as the mayor arrived, Da boldly strode into the street, his rough hand held out far to meet the king of the Boston Irish. Curly smiled as at a friend, and grandly shook the hand of the man who shook the hand. Or then, when my father turned, it was a man transformed, taller, all the tension gone, and everybody knew he was grand, and held electric in his hand.